Hello YouTube. Today we have a iPhone XS. As you can see, the back is cracked. So I'm going to be doing a step-by-step walkthrough of how to do a back glass, or at least what I do is a housing replacement. And it's just a matter of transferring all of the small parts over from one housing to another, and then you add your battery, board, camera, Face ID components, throw your screen on, and then wham bam, you're good to go. There's essentially two ways to go about this. The first is by just getting a bare housing. This is going to be the most labor intensive and tedious repair, as you have to individually transfer over every single one of the brackets, small parts, flex cables. Some of the flex cables are very thin, they're easy to damage. If this is your daily phone, I mean, you obviously want to practice as much care as possible, but just be aware. If you damage a component, obviously you'd have to, at that point, order one while the phone is just sitting in pieces. Not that big of a deal for me. I can go to my kit, take out a new part, but there are housings that you can purchase that aren't just bare housings. If you're on a budget, this is a good option, or if you have the skill set and the patience, this is a good option. If you don't, it's not a bad idea to just do basically just to buy a housing with all the parts pre-assembled, and then, like I said, it's a matter of transferring your battery, board, camera, Face ID, screen, and then wham bam, you're good to go. I want to say, if I wasn't narrating this whole thing, this would take me maybe an hour, maybe a little bit over an hour. I'm going to narrate some of this, just the intricate parts. But with that, we're going to need a couple of things. So we have several different drivers, a tri-wing to open up the device, and then there are 3 different bits for basically everything. A Phillips, I use a tri-wing Y000, and then iPhone has this screw, which is a standoff screw, so you need a bit. A flathead would work in place of this. That's kind of a pain in the neck. These are so much easier. I know iFixit. You might have noticed the what is it? iFixit logo. But yeah, the drivers are amazing. Their bits are amazing. They're not paying you to say this, not yet at least. But I've been using them for quite some time. I used to strip the tri-point screws, and then somebody pointed me, and that was however long ago the iPhone 7 was, so many years ago at this point, and I've never looked back. So if that's something that you can buy just the bits for a couple of bucks. I think they're like $3 each. Well worth it. Usually I order a couple at a time, as I might have to replace one every 9 months to a year. And we need a couple of other things: a nylon spudger, a opening tool. I use 2 different sets of tweezers. There's a couple different bit points. There's an extra, I'm almost positive it's this model, but the charging port down here, it's not on this list, is kind of a pain to get to. So I use a really small Phillips. So you might need one of these, you might not, depending on your setup. What else? Heat. So either a hot air gun or a blow dryer of some sort. Magnetic mat. This is not necessary. Same thing with heat. Heat isn't necessary, but not just for removing the screen, but for removing the flex cables, as they're basically all held down with adhesive, and once you warm it up, the adhesive is much easier to work with. You're much less likely to tear one of the, or several of the different cables, flex cables. Once again, if you tear one, then you have to order one. So ideally, you should be able to reuse all this, and you shouldn't, be in a scenario where you're having to. But just in case it happens, it's not a bad idea to have extra parts on hand in case you damage them. What else? For the battery tabs, I use just a couple of drops of 99%, but you can also use 91. Don't use 70. Isopropyl alcohol and adhesive. So there is basically a gasket. It doesn't make the phone water resistant, but it will prevent if you don't have it there, the screen just sort of clicks up against the frame, drives most people nuts. So I think these are, I don't know, 50 cents or $1 if you, a lot of the times. Once again, not necessary, but I use at least, if the customer is trading their phone in, a lot of the times I'll just use double-sided tape because it's cheap if they're going to hold on to it. I prefer to use, I think once again, these things are like 50 cents or $1, but I'll use a battery adhesive for laying down because you have to transfer the battery over. If your battery is terrible, it's not, this is a great time to change out your battery. Keep in mind on the 10S, ever since the 10R, 10S series, the battery is serialized to the board. So if you do replace the battery, there's a stupid little message that'll pop up and you won't be able to see the the capacity anymore. But there's a program. I use coconut battery it only works for Mac, but I'm sort of getting off into the weeds here. But yeah, so these 2 bits of adhesive, and then last but not least, either a good memory and or patience, as this is, I do this all the time, obviously, and it's, like I said, very labor intensive. So with that said, let's get started. Now, in this scenario, I'm going to be reusing the screen. So at least for me, it's important to not damage or crack, which on this model is not overly complicated. On the XR and the 11 are a little bit more of a little bit more complicated, only because the bezel is thicker. They're harder to. These are a little bit easier to open up. Also, depending on how old the phone is, depending on how strong the adhesive the gasket is. Now, if it's fighting you, you can just use heat, warm up the perimeter. You really don't want the pry tool inside of the phone. Barely a millimeter. You just literally want it. The technique that I have, so you're not forcing it, right around here, there is the flex cable. So obviously you want to avoid, you don't want your tool to be in that far because you don't want to accidentally cut it. Once it gets to that point, you can kind of just open it on up, but keep in mind your immediately north of the SIM card is where your, actually can't even see from here, right there, immediately north of the SIM card is the flex. There are a couple of brackets, once again, depending on how strong your adhesive is. The first one you have to get past is right here, and then there's 2 more right here, but usually by the time you get the first one, you can kind of just wiggle it open. Now, I also left this out of the introduction, but I'll mention it here. But it's not a bad idea for some of the things, for some of the, specifically the cameras and the board, to have little baggies to put them in. I'm gonna be doing this all in one stretch, and I'm still gonna put these in baggies. That's the last thing you want is for dust or debris to get on the lenses. The rear camera is replaceable, but the front camera is not, and once you do, you lose Face ID, so it's very important to keep these intact and make sure that they stay clean. And as for the board, you want to make sure that the board doesn't get any dust or debris in the lenses. Now, normally I use metal tweezers, but you are not me. You always want to avoid, if you can, using metal. First things first, you're disconnecting the battery. You might have seen me do that. First and last thing to disconnect on this model is always going to be the battery, as you never want to connect or disconnect anything while there is still power running through the board. Just because the phone is off doesn't mean that there isn't power running through the board. We can take our screen and set this aside. Now, you can do this in any particular order. Usually I will start by removing the board, then the battery, then the charging port, and then the remaining flexes up top. Now, you can do this in different sections, or you can tear literally the entire thing down and then start over, and then put it back together. I prefer to do it in sections. It keeps your magnetic mat more organized. Yeah, too big. Now, you are going to have to remove one of the battery tabs to get to, and mine is already tearing. So we come in, use a drop, and I use a twisting. You'll notice that I keep twisting the adhesive around. It just gives it a little bit more surface area to grab onto. If you use the flat end of your spudger, it's relatively safe. You can remove the SIM tray. There's a little pin in order to get you're best off pushing the SIM pin back into its slot. There's a little bracket here. I'll mention what way that's oriented during reassembly. All right, so I'm going to start with removing the battery. All right. There is a little plastic sort of piece. I don't know what its purpose is. Usually I will pull it out. You want to make sure to press down on the, you can accidentally tear the Taptic flex if you pull too hard. So just be careful of that. That's your loudspeaker. And that's the Taptic Engine. So same style as the tab up top. You sort of just have to peel it back just a little bit. Now, once you get to this step, one of the annoying things about these tabs, unlike some of the other ones, like on the 6s and 7s, with the 8s, they changed their adhesive, and you basically have no grabbing strength. Like I used to be able to just take the alcohol, put it right on, and then start grabbing. Now you have to sort of get it started, then use your alcohol. Now the last one, as you can see in the middle, is in front of the speaker flex. I didn't use any alcohol that time. There's usually enough residual from either side. We can take our battery here, set it aside. At this point, don't be too heavy-handed. Once again, this is our flex, our Face ID flex, and it's not replaceable. So we now have two last. I just use the pointed end of our spudger. Same thing here. Now we have a couple of standoff bits and some more screws for the charging port. And they go, you'll notice they go back and forth. I don't know why. In Apple's ultimate wisdom, they decided to change up. But that's just the way it is. There's a little plastic piece right here. There's a little bit of foam that sort of keeps it held on. So if it doesn't want to come out, just, tug on it a little bit. It's not really connected to anything vital, so you're not going to mess anything up. Now, there are two Phillips right here. There's a bit of adhesive that this is held on with. And this is the one that I really just don't like for whatever reason. Now, here's where the heat is going to come in handy. This is our sim pin. There's some adhesive along the flex here, some here, pretty much all over the bottom. Just for reference, I'm using a hot air gun that's used for soldering, micro soldering. It is set to 400 degrees Celsius. So unless you have a hot air gun for like paint stripping, if you just have a hair dryer, you're more than likely going to need to heat it up for a little bit longer. The first step, just gently lift. Then the second, I run my spudger, flat end. It's rather gentle right here. And you lift up. Now for the next, we have that one. Now your housing may or may not come. Mine, for instance, doesn't. This is one of my least favorite parts of the repair, but you can if you want. You don't need to, but there is a mesh and these little plastic placeholders that they keep the mesh in place, and I guess they direct sound or audio in and out. They do have, first of all, they're very light. So I have accidentally, breathed or sneezed, or a gust of wind has come along. So just be mindful of that. You're almost better off putting them in a bag somewhere, as you can far too easily, get up to go get something to eat and then come back and then they're missing. Now, if you're active, or you're a contractor, or electrician, plumber, you work with your hands, these tend to get very dirty. And if you are having problems with people hearing you on the phone, or with audio, like let's say if you put somebody on speakerphone, or and it sounds very faint, or your ringer sounds faint, it's not a bad idea while you have these open, kind of like if you're working on your car while it's out, you can basically clean these up. And literally just soap and water, or something that I use is called Blue Tack. And these do a pretty good job. But obviously, if yours are fine, then so I prefer getting as many things off of the, basically just doing each, even though I've done this repair many times, prefer to be simple. Get things off of the mat, less likely to lose, misplace. This next one is kind of a pain, only because there's one hole as of now. This is the only model that has one of these. Hopefully it's the last. Once that's done, we need this piece to go in first. Now, usually what I do is start with the screws that only go into this flex. So there's a two Phillips, and then the tri-wing is right there. We then have the Phillips there. Once that's done, if you had trouble with your charging port before, while your charging port is out, you can basically just get in there with some tweezers and dig out some lint, if there is any. I mean, I'm getting a little bit. I don't know if you can see that, but I don't think that would be enough to cause charging issues. But let's just say you had to prop up your charging port at an angle in order to get it to charge, or you had to like push down on it, that's a pretty clear indicator that you'll need to change your clean out your charging port. In worst case scenario, you can swap out the actual port, but in my experience, it's almost never the case. Typically, it's just dirty. So this piece, this flex tucks underneath there. I don't know how much that matters, but my approach is if Apple put it there, I'll put it back, with one or two exceptions. There are two more tri-wings. Then we have this piece right here. So for the time being, we can put away our standoff. And now we can move on to our Taptic Engine. There we go. Now you want to make sure that this post aligns, or else you're going to have to backtrack a little bit. Now that that's done, usually I'll start with that. Now you can kind of see an outline of the, vaguely, you can see the outline of the previous 3 strips. If you don't get it dead on, it's not that big of a deal. Like, honestly, I kind of messed up right there, but no biggie. And I use the flat side of my spudger just to make sure it properly adheres. Maybe I'm done. Now I have an appointment I have to get to, so I will go there and I will be right back. So, I'm back. The remainder of this repair is typically, well, it's divided into the wireless charging coil, which is also part of the volume up down mute switch, and then you have this antenna, and then you have 2 flexes over here. So usually I do this in 3 separate groups, because even though these are 2 separate flexes, I sort of count that as one area. We also have the brackets that the bezel connects into. Now, you don't have to, you can just as easily screw right through it. Which sometimes I do. Once again, like every other screw is one or the other. At least on this, as you can see, there's pretty much only adhesive here and here. There's none along here, so just keep that in mind. Now you're gonna have to use quite a bit more heat on the coil. Last but not least, use the pointed end of your spudger. Just lift up gently. There's not a whole lot of adhesive holding, and it's holding the front mic down. There's nothing holding the flash down. Now, earlier in the video I said if Apple puts it in, I put it back, and then I said there are a few exceptions. This is one of them. But these stupid little hanger things, there's one for each button. And I'm getting ahead of myself. I need to remove this flex. But now you'll notice that it rotates down for whatever reason. Many years ago, before I did housing replacements, I don't know why this took me so hard to figure this out, but just like that. Now, usually I lift up. Now, there's sort of an entry point right here, as you can clearly see. And at least on this model, there's adhesive just sort of in the corners and not here, 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 or there. You need to be careful. And then once again, sometimes I'll do this thing where I spin my, and that helps. But you just want to get it started, and then you can use the flat end of your spudger. And then along comes the tweezers. Once again, as you can see, there's no adhesive here, 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 or here. It's relegated to the corners. Now, let me slow this down a little bit, but you have these hangers. Literally, you can just pop them off. I push this way. In hundreds of repairs, I've never had this bracket come off. I'm not entirely sure why Apple puts it there, but they do. But you have just like that. Same thing here. I know it's not the clearest, but you just pop it up. And then literally you can just pull out. And you can just push these buttons out. And out, 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 out. This is now a bare frame. We can set this aside. So now it's just a matter of reassembling our frame. Now, if you have dirty buttons, if your buttons are, they don't click the same way, it's not a bad idea to literally just, take your shirt or take a cloth, clean off. Now, as far as the button goes, this little bracket right here, there's only one area. There's a little slot that it fits into, and you'll hear it snap. I don't know if you can hear it snap. I can hear it snap. I can hear an audible click. I can feel an audible click. Now, assuming the adhesive is still on your flash, you can kind of just set this in here and it'll stay in there. If your adhesive came off, it's not a bad idea to put the tiniest little bit right up here. But I'll do that. Now these two holes go over these two posts, if that wasn't obvious. Remember, there is an order. So your side button flex goes on first, and then this little antenna goes on second. And we have the tri-wing screws. slightly larger tri-wing. There's usually enough residual adhesive left over on the back of this just to keep it in place. But right before I put this on, I will try to point this out. But I don't know if you can see this, but there's just a little bit of dust. Honestly, this really isn't that much. But while it's out, I'm just going to clean it. More than enough times I have had somebody tell me that they can't put their phone on mute, and it's typically because it has nothing to do with the functionality of the switch. It has everything to typically has everything to do with the movement or lack thereof. So just cleaning it off is oftentimes all that's needed. Alright, so I was just about to say don't tighten this all the way. And that's exactly what I had to do. I had to backtrack. Why am I having such an issue with this? I can hear the switch. You can hear it click. Now, I don't think this matters all that much, but the bracket goes in, and this little bracket goes on top. And it goes from top to bottom. It goes Phillips, tri-wing. I start with the upper left, so that screw, and then this tri-wing goes in the top, and then the Phillips. Once again, they keep going back and forth. The odd thing about this is that the Max, the other obviously the larger model of this, same year, uses way more Phillips. I don't know why Apple, in their infinite wisdom, decided not to. So now it's time for our board. Now you want to make sure that the honestly, I really don't need to mess around with the flash right now. That's just going to come undone. You want to make sure that the charging port flex is tucked pretty much as far back as you can get it, as if it doesn't. I mean, I've literally had to take out the entire board and undo everything because I didn't because the charging port was, you know, a millimeter away, you know, this way. It was, you know, it was off by just a millimeter or so, which kind of sucks. Once I get that, I usually start with the SIM tray. Now there's a little, you can kind of see it right here, but immediately next to this, there's a little, I don't know what you would call that, but there's this piece immediately right here. There's a sort of little hook on it, and this just 90 degrees. Sort of just have to feed it in. That's the last standoff. Then we have this piece right here. There's a little, it's meant as a grounding. It grounds, I think, the frame or the screen to the housing. But I mean, essentially, there's a sort of flat piece here. This slot here goes into the frame this way. The flash has a habit of coming undone. Literally, the best advice that I can give is just try to nudge it in place. And once this is in place, we can then come with our camera. Now, I will say this. You need to make sure that there's no dust or mainly just that there's no dust or debris on the lens. I mean, essentially my housing has sort of been sitting out this whole time, so I didn't listen to my earlier piece of advice when I said pretty much cover everything up. I mean, really, it's not all that bad if a piece of dust gets in there, because if it does, you clean it out. If a piece of dust gets on your cameras, that's a different story. So now remember, it's a Phillips right here. And there's a little, I don't know what you would call this, but there's a little piece sticking out there that fits in there. I'll pull this out again and I'll show you. But there's a groove in this plastic piece right here, and you can kind of see let me zoom in here, but you can see this piece here, not this larger one, this smaller one essentially fits. It's hard to get this on camera. Essentially fits into that groove, and you want the top part here sitting just below the frame. If it's not, then you can damage the screen when you reseat everything, when you go to reseat the screen, which obviously on a 10S is bad news. So this flex is supposed to sit underneath this connector. There, once that's done, we have our battery. Now, usually what I do with the battery, and I'll say this ahead of time, if you take off your adhesive, you take off this and you basically adhere it, you sometimes can have a hard time, you'll have a difficult time getting the connector to sit flush. Usually what I find is easiest is to, all right, this isn't going to work out because of that. Okay, the same principle. I will connect this flex ahead of time. That way I know that the position of this flex relative to its connector is good. Press down and then use your fingernail or a spudger. We then have our gasket. These holes up here are for your Face ID, as well as down here. You can kind of see that they align. Right here they don't align, so make sure. I always say pretty much always. As you can see, it's a pretty exact fit. Use your spudger, sort of just push down. Now, at least this one I like quite a bit. Some of them, this is a sort of like a three-piece design where you have obviously the first layer you take off, then that's where the adhesive, then you lay it down, then you can take it off, and you have this piece right here that you would leave in place right until you connect the screen. It's nice because it gives you the chance to connect the screen, test everything out, and if something doesn't work, you don't have to fight the adhesive removing it. Once again, I mentioned this in the beginning of the video, but you want to make sure that your battery is disconnected. There's our battery. So clearly I can see that our power button, or the side button as it's now called, is functional. The display is functional. Touch functionality is functional. We can sort of just go through each individual button. So volume up, down, and switch. The flash is functional. So that's rear camera, portrait. Obviously the hole isn't really aligned properly. Test, 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 test. Test, 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 test. So there are several different microphones. So for those of you who are not aware, when you talk on the phone, there's a microphone. That's the microphone that's down here. When you talk on a speakerphone, when you utilize Siri or voice dictation, it uses a microphone that is in the ear speaker. So if you ever hear somebody talking to Siri in the bottom of their phone, and essentially it's traveling right past it and going into the ear speaker mic. And then for FaceTime or for videos, so like I'm using my iPhone to record this right now, it's using, well actually I have a separate microphone, but if I didn't, it would use the microphone that's on the back, which is this little hole right here for anyone that's ever wondered what that was. Test, 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 test. So as we can see, obviously the cameras as well as the videos work. The way that you would test the lower test, 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 test. Test, test, test. So that's the So as you can see, whenever you see waves, and this should go from top to bottom, that's how you know your microphone is working. If it's just flat, it means that one of the microphones is pretty much damaged or just malfunctioning. So just check that, make sure that it isn't torn or maybe need to replace it. Honestly, that's happened to me sometimes after I just did all this work. That's one of the sort of unfortunate parts of repair. Exactly the reason that I'm not installing this or any of the other flex connectors. It's just nice to obviously check everything, make sure that it works. Obviously in the process, I played the video back. I can hear the ear speaker. I'm not sorry, not the ear speaker, the loudspeaker. We can see that the charging port works. And if you have a wireless charger, I do, it also works. We can also see that Wi-Fi works. It's picking up some of my neighbors. Pretty much last but not least would be Face ID. So typically once it gets to this stage right here, I don't know if you can see that, but right there, it means that your Face ID works. If it does the thing where it says move a little lower, from my understanding, that means that your dot projector, which is this little thing to the right, is pretty much damaged. And the unfortunate part is, like I said, with Face ID components, there's no replacing those. If your adhesive starts to lift up in the process, just sort of push down with it until it stays in place. Last but not least, I start with the big one, the Phillips, and then the rest of them are tri-wing. Now, we need to make sure to seat the screen properly. So first and foremost, make sure your Face ID or your Face ID cameras are seated properly just below the frame. At that point, then we will connect this first. You sort of just pivot. Make sure to tuck. I mean, if you have an original Apple screen, they, at least from the factory, they come with this flex. It's sort of tucked inward, and it's kind of hard to get on camera, but you'll notice if you sort of lift up your screen immediately right, yeah, you can barely see it, but right there's an Apple logo. Essentially, it's that little slot right there. If your flex doesn't immediately want to, don't just smush down, because I've done that once or twice, and then you can damage your screen. Once again, don't damage your screen. They're expensive. Basically, all you would have to do is sort of just take the flat side of your spudger or sort of just nudge it in. At this point, make sure to look down. Sort of look down. Make sure that it's seated properly. It's not, bulging, or the bezel isn't sticking up. Last but not least, we have the pentalobes. And that's it. Comment below. Let me know how your repair went. If you liked the video, if you got some value from it, please do give me a thumbs up. It greatly helps out with YouTube's almighty algorithm. Yeah, I'll leave it there. Thank you so much. See you next time.